Hey everybody, it's David Kemp. I'm your host of Highway to Health podcast series, and I'm excited to have you here. If you followed along, if you paid attention, you know we're obsessed with celebrating, understanding, and learning more about how we're improving the patient access to care, the experience while they get that care, and then of course, how we are improving the patient outcomes. And this podcast is meant to celebrate the people, the companies, the thoughts, the ideas that are improving all of those areas. And that's why I'm really excited to have our guest on the show today. He's the CEO of Integral. And I think you're going to learn a lot from him. I've learned a lot from him already, just learning and listening to him on previous podcasts. So Shub, welcome to Highway to Health.
I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to chatting today.
This can be a lot of fun. And, I think you guys are solving one of the main challenges in healthcare across a lot of different areas of healthcare. We're going to get into that in a minute, but it's become a tradition here on Highway to Health. I like to inspire our listeners through your voice by understanding, a healthy habit that you've built into your routine so that you stay mentally, physically healthy and you're able to perform at a high level. You're a soccer player in your past, right? I'm sure that's a part of your routine now, but share with our listeners, a habit that you've built into your daily routine.
Yeah, for sure. I think something small but significant I just make sure to do every single day is just a quick grateful list at the beginning of the day. It could be as super simple as I'm glad I can bike to work or something, just because those small things I think tend to get forgotten. And it's good to just have a check in daily life to make sure hey, I actually have it pretty good. And so I do a quick 3 things, kind of like a shower thought or getting ready for work kind of thing. But I find that it's actually really good for centering myself for the whole day, I would say.
Oh, that's pretty good. There's a guy that I listen to, podcast that I listen to, and when he's asked, "How are you?" he always says, "Better than I deserve." And that kind of rings true.
Yeah, I was about to say it's kind of the same message over here, I would say.
Yeah. And it's good to remind ourselves of that. Tell me a little bit about your soccer days. You're a big soccer guy. So we talked about the mental side of things and how we stay healthy. What about physically?
For sure. Yeah, I wish I could get onto the field a bit more often than I do right now, but I'm averaging 1 to 2 times a week, which I'm grateful for because I think it has definitely gone up and down in the past couple of years. But yeah, I think physical health and mental health, I think, are just so intertwined in the sense that one feeds into the other. And so as much as I can, I try and get onto the soccer field. Luckily, there's one close by to my apartment here in New York. And so whenever I can get a group of people, or sometimes I'll just find a group there, I try to just kind of get out there and kick the ball around. I like the opportunity to disconnect. It's just there's nothing in my head other than soccer when I'm playing it. And then I also try and hit the gym a few times a week. That one I'll say it's not as fun, but definitely still good for the physical health.
Yeah, I agree. And that's awesome. Soccer is a great sport. Hopefully you can get out there and play a little bit more when it all dries up in New York.
Yeah, I would say it's not as much fun sliding around as it used to be. I prefer the grass to be dry. We
talked about this before we jumped on the show, but it's great to hear that you're safe. Your place is safe for the most part through some of the flooding that you guys are experiencing. So hopefully it stays that way. And our thoughts are obviously with those that a little less fortunate with the weather that you guys are receiving. But let's jump into this. For our listeners, maybe set kind of a little bit of background, a frame of reference, of context. The North Star that you had in mind when starting Integral. Give us a little background on the company, and then we'll dive into a little bit more specifics.
For sure. Yeah, I think the best way to explain the insight that led to Integral is actually my time right before. And so I was at this company called LiveRamp, a public ad tech company based out of the Bay. And LiveRamp's business was helping the major retailers of the world, like Walmart, Target, these massive stores who have tons of offline data. So picture in-store data, receipts, sensor data, CRMs. And then LiveRamp was in the business of saying, hey, Walmart, you have all this offline data, connect it to your online data, because the offline and online world in today's existence have to be linked. And so LiveRamp was in the business of helping taking that offline data and connecting it to Walmart's app data, Walmart's ads data. And so the idea was to get a 360-degree view of people like you and me so that a Walmart could order inventory more effectively to a particular region. New York just had a lot of rain. An example could be ordering more umbrellas given like a certain data set saying that this is going to be the demand for the particular foreseeable future. And so the idea was put together these very rich data sets such that data-driven decision could be made. And so when I joined LiveRamp, LiveRamp Health was just being spun up, kind of like a Google X-like team, so a side team using corporate resources for experiments. And it was the mission was pretty simple. Take this exact thing that I just described for the Walmarts and the Targets of the world and apply that to the Pfizers and the Modernas of the world. Because at a fundamental level, Pfizer's always trying to optimize inventory optimization or optimize inventory ordering, optimize R&D, so drug development. And so they're not so dissimilar. And so we ended up catching fire with a few of our product lines that we released, especially during 2020 and 2021, that would take very HIPAA-regulated data sets and combine them with consumer data sets such that you could understand, hey, Shub lives in New York, he's this age, this race, has these conditions. How can I ensure that he gets a COVID vaccine effectively? And so that's just like one of the unlimited use cases that come from putting together very rich regulated data sets. However, the problem I kept running into was not actually analyzing a data set or feeding it into our technology. It was the HIPAA compliance necessary to actually even connect data sets. And so what I mean by this is HIPAA says you can't violate patient privacy. And in order to do that today, a Pfizer has to get together all the data sets that they want and ship it off to a consultant for all these HIPAA data compliance procedures. And I was kind of like the main conduit or the main project coordinator for all of these reviews for all of our clients across big pharma, all the way down to small startups. And I realized there was always a constant friction between compliance and privacy and data usability. And I think that was partially due to just armies of consultants having to manually analyze all of these data sets and give recommendations to someone like me, who then would have to then give them to our clients. And this back and forth is just, it takes too long, it costs too much, and it results oftentimes in low fidelity data sets. And so you might think what's the problem with that? It's, well, at the end of the day, if you don't have a good data set for delivering people medications or creating medications or any sort of use case related to that, it does tend to have a pretty big impact, even at the lowest level. And so Integral was inspired out of this. And so I basically said, okay, there should be a technology to do this. And so my co-founder, John, and I, we co-founded Integral. And Integral's one-liner is just that we streamline the HIPAA compliance processes necessary to connect sensitive healthcare data sets. What that unpacks into is that we help Pfizer, Moderna, all these massive healthcare companies, and even down to small startups, we help them connect sensitive healthcare data sets in hours to days rather than weeks to months by automating a lot of those compliance processes that consultants lead today.
Yeah, it's been, I've been in healthcare the last 12 years. That's probably been the biggest, you said friction, so I'll use that term. It's been the biggest friction in getting the right decisions at the right time and being able to take the right actions on time is surfacing insights from the large amounts of data that we have. That's never been the problem in healthcare, is lacking data. No, the data is there. We have a hard time getting data to interoperate with other data. We have a hard time normalizing data or anonymizing data so that we can use it. And it sounds like what Integral's purpose is to make that a little bit easier, especially when with dealing with large amounts of it for these huge companies like Pfizer and Moderna.
Exactly right. And one thing I would just add on to that is we service some of the larger companies, but even with our small startup partners, we notice that everybody's got their hands on just massive amounts of data because we generated so much during COVID and we continue to generate so much. Telemedicine, all these data intensive operations, they became the status quo, which is great. I think data can be utilized in a very useful way. The difference today, I think, is between Integral and incumbents is that there's always a friction between data usability and privacy. And I just saw enough times that you can maximize patient privacy and data utility. And so that's the kind of the end mission of Integral. We're going to do it in a bunch of different ways, but I would say we're always working towards that.
Talk a little bit about how you're maintaining privacy with this data. I was in revenue cycle for a while, and we were working with technology, and whenever we wanted to test something, we would literally, export it to an Excel document. We'd take the first name and last name column, or we would take the social security number column. We'd blank that out and try to autofill it with some dummy data, and then run some tests on the efficacy of that technology. Without oversimplifying, tell us how you at Integral and the needs of your partners, how are you coming together to anonymize or privatize, or maintain privacy on this large data set? How are you going about that? What are the steps that you have to take to make sure that the data stays compliant and privacy is maintained?
For sure. And just to set the stage to really cement Integral's part in the ecosystem, today there are tons of companies that like a Pfizer or Moderna that can get their hands on data either through buying them or through having them in-house. And they're already de-identifying these data sets without Integral. And so they're using companies like Datavant, HealthVerity, et cetera, to make sure that the data set is sufficiently obfuscated. However, they oftentimes end up, I would say almost every time actually, they end up connecting those data sets to another type of data set, whether it's another de-identified data set or like an ads data set to find out how a particular messaging campaign is going, or some consumer data set to find out more about people like you and me, because as you might be able to guess, our medical profile is oftentimes informed by our non-medical choices. And so this holistic analysis has become, I would say, from a top 5 strategy to a top 1 strategy for these companies. And so all of that's happening outside of Integral. The problem that Integral solves is when you want to take those data sets and connect them to other data sets, something that's very standard in any other type of industry to do any kind of analysis. That's where the 13 weeks to get through compliance come in. That's where some of the stuff that you mentioned about filling values and whatnot come in. And so very mechanically, how do we manage that privacy? Well, we notice that in these data sets, first name and last name, that's just the starting point. Sometimes it's possible somebody's Facebook friend count can actually be violating, considering that depending on what attributes it's paired with, because it's publicly available information. And so that level of fuzzy matching, when you get down to the non-obvious metrics like first name and last name, that's what takes the consultant so long today. And so what we do is we read a data set. And so we're either in our clients' infrastructures through an on-prem deployment, or they can send data to us either way. And then we're continuously reading data and monitoring data. So as it's changed or bought in the course of normal operations, we just have a pulse on what's happening. And then we run a variety of privacy models that not only assess the kind of the most obvious attributes like first name, last name, et cetera, but even down to every single column, like somebody's race, ethnicity, social profile count, all these things. And then we are able to basically run a statistical analysis on every single data set combination in a number of hours, so we can understand, hey, what's violating, what's not violating. And then we actually present all of those problems via an easy to use UI. And then we just let a data scientist kind of experiment with whatever they want to do to solve those problems. And then kind of like a credit card score checker or a credit score checker, you see your privacy score go up and down. And then once you're low enough, we deliver you all the right paperwork and we deliver you a clean data set. So it's the power of the consultant in the box. And it's also the power of experimentation that's just not possible today in a box.
That's powerful. Helps you make decisions faster, get to the solution faster. And then human error isn't always eliminated, but I mean, you know how it goes. If you can minimize risk, and a lot of times that's also a big win. That's exciting. It makes sense why, Integral was able to secure, a recent funding round of $7 million. And that's a huge step. So congratulations, first of all. But tell me what this funding means for your organization. How do you plan to use that funding to transform, this landscape of healthcare data accessibility and healthcare data compliance?
For sure. And I think over the course of the past year or so, Integral has been a reactive solution, meaning all these companies are bogged down with intense timelines, backlogs of consulting workflows. And so really, I think that the key to our name in the industry and what we've built out so far is coming in and solving a problem as quickly as possible, because these companies are so behind on their timelines, or so behind or frustrated on with these processes. And so where I see this funding taking us is actually becoming a bit more proactive solution, meaning today, if I had to kind of simply say what we do, we help create data sets faster. And then that makes downstream use cases happen quicker, whether it's machine learning model training, ad targeting, any number of kind of like downstream business use cases. However, where we want to be and where I think we're really well positioned to be is actually a proactive solution to solve most data compliance needs for these healthcare companies, and still in the umbrella of HIPAA. And so, for example, today we help get a data set out the door as quickly as possible. Where I want us to be is Pfizer and Moderna is thinking about buying a data set. Well, they use our new product called Privacy Workbench, which helps you simulate the privacy impact on a data set before you actually buy it, such that you can make a more informed buying decision. So to juxtapose that with today a company buys $2 million worth of data. They use Integral to squeeze out as much value as they can, because if they went through a consulting process, maybe they only get $500K worth of data. That's a reactive solution because the data is already there. It's like you're just trying to meet the targets. I want us to be like a planning tool. I want us to be like a tool that is used proactively, such that these companies can make more informed decisions about buying data, certain projects they want to make. And so all this to say, where do I see us going? I see us launching a couple of features. So taking our privacy analysis today and turning that to like a privacy impact simulation, which we're going to be releasing publicly here soon, where a company can look at the types of data they would want and find out, hey, is this actually feasible from a compliance and privacy perspective before I put all of my resources into motion? I want them to be able to kind of play around with our synthetic data generation such that they can understand, hey, what types of data do I actually need to make my business goal work? Not like, hey, I have all this data, how do I make it work? And so that's where we're headed increasingly, where we want to become kind of like that data compliance platform that's at the beginning of the supply chain and really helping companies, I would say, make the most use of their data even before they have it.
I would imagine there's quite a bit of education that you have to provide for your partners, your customers, because this isn't something that they're aware of. I would imagine, this is such an innovative, disruptive technology and solution that you're having to educate these partners all the time on the art of the possible. How are you going to the industry and educating them at scale on what's possible and what you're able to do and some of the success that you're already seeing?
Definitely. I think part of it is making sure the story connects in the sense that what we've done to date is not so different from what we're going to do in the future. It's just being positioned earlier in the kind of like the deal cycles. It's also releasing a number of features that are not necessarily novel in and of themselves. So like synthetic data generation, or like I would say our other technologies are quite novel, but synthetic data generation, for example, not novel. We're just using it in a novel way. So part of it is saying like, hey, we have a unique marriage of technologies, but they're not unique in and of themselves. So like the fear that needs to be there from like hey, what is this? Like that doesn't need to be as present. And another piece is the success we've had to date. And so we always try and quantify and qualify as much of our success with our clients. And so we can very critically point to big pharma, small startups, big tech, saving hours to or I would say saving months and going down to hours to days with us to get live with a project, having a cheaper solution, like, apples to apples comparison. And so connecting all of this with, our subject matter expertise, with our technical expertise, I find that when I connect all these dots, the story isn't as jarring or isn't as like kind of like whiplash, so to speak. It's more like, okay, I see where you're connecting all these dots. And so how you started and that main product that we have today, I think people are able to see we're building on that. We're not necessarily like creating like an entirely new thing, so to speak. And so I think that familiarity tends to resonate because people understand that, okay, it's the same Integral, just being extended to more capabilities. So it's like that same confidence, that same kind of security and there's not like that novel risk. It's not an innovation like budget, or it's not an innovation idea. It's purely building on the bread and butter, so to speak, of what we have today.
Yeah. The one thing I know about healthcare is risk and trust and fear all play huge parts of that deal cycle. And having those customer stories, having some proven use cases and things that you guys have helps solidify your position and help you gain authority. And then you have an opportunity to truly educate and guide people through the challenges that they've been experiencing. And if you can teach them something new, if you can teach them something valuable, that helps as well. And you guys are clearly doing that. You specifically are. So tell us, this actual term, I've used it today. The term disruptor or disruption in healthcare has been used a lot, probably overused. But I'd like you to share a little bit about, the impact that this could have if we were to take a step back and kind of look at this from a bird's eye view with this innovation and disruption happening on a larger scale moving forward and trending more toward in this direction over the next few years. Elaborate a little bit on how Integral is innovating in this industry and why it's going to truly challenge the status quo that we've become accustomed to over the last decade or so. How is this innovation going to challenge the status quo moving forward?
Certainly. I think the statement I made earlier about maximizing privacy and data utility or data analytics, kind of whatever you want to sub in on that data richness piece, I think that in and of itself is quite challenging to the status quo, primarily because I think in healthcare, what's thought of as the most safe or the most secure is also thought of as the most scrubbed or the most dry data set, in the sense that if you take out all of the values about a human, you have a very secure data set. And while that could be true, I think you also have taken out all of the business value that you need as a company and that your patients also need or your customers also need. Because I think there's a lot of value lost in not putting the patient first. And so I think the status quo of, taking privacy and just saying, okay, I'm going to meet privacy by not taking into account any of these very valuable data points about a person to ensure it's safe. I think that's the status quo, and I think we're already challenging that. And we definitely notice some friction there, but we also notice that the companies who end up adopting us, they find out, okay, privacy is an enabler, it's not a blocker, and I think that is also one of the ethos of Integral. And so, how do I think we'll continue to challenge? I think a lot of our capabilities are getting ahead of compliance problems or seeing compliance around the corner. Whereas I think, like what you mentioned in healthcare and in your own experience, I think you had to deal with it as soon as it became a problem. And so when we help companies see around the corner, that in and of itself is another challenge to the status quo, because it's just not very common. And so I think our new product, privacy suite that we're going to launch, our privacy workbench, so to speak, the thing that we're going to launch here soon publicly, I think that's going to show a lot of people that you'll have the same confidence and robustness that you've always expected from Integral with our world-renowned HIPAA experts or our technical prowess, but you'll be able to kind of use that in the same way that other industries can, in the sense that you don't have to kind of wait for a problem to happen. You can see around the corner. And so I think the biggest challenge, or the biggest kind of challenge to the status quo, is going to be us saying, hey, Integral makes it such that a Pfizer can analyze data at the speed of a Walmart by automating out all of the regulations.
It's powerful. Well, good answer, by the way. That was really, the answer was better than the question, which is awesome.
No, I think it's a good question too. It's a team effort.
We've talked about a lot, and this is a new concept for a lot of our listeners, I would imagine. But if you could leave them understanding one thing after this conversation, what's the one thing that you'd want them walking away from this podcast understanding?
I would say overall, not related to Integral, I would say that data analysis and data needs are changing critically in healthcare. But you can't ask, what can I do, before asking, is this okay? And so that has always been at odds. And I think that friction is especially costly in today's digital world and today's very modern world. And so one of the takeaways I always like to say is that when you automate the answer to, is this okay to do? You open up a whole new world of possibilities. And then with regards to Integral itself, I always like to emphasize that we are a data set connectivity and data enabling tool. We definitely do it through automating compliance, but the main takeaway I want people to have is to think, okay, Integral is my key to utilizing data as quickly and as effectively as possible. And all the compliance stuff underneath is just an effort to do so, and really put privacy at the forefront as an enabler and not a blocker.
I've learned a lot from listening to you on previous podcasts. I've learned a lot today. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface on understanding the possibilities through this type of innovation. And I appreciate you educating me and our listeners. And I can't wait to learn more from you. And so I would encourage you to continue educating the industry. And you not only do you have a great solution, but I love listening to how you articulate the benefits, the value, and even the challenges that are present currently. So thank you for being here, and you're welcome back anytime. And I would encourage everybody to look into Integral, understand it as much as you can, and then continue following the company as we progress. So thanks for being here. Good luck to you, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.